everyone. I'm Sarah. I'm Director of Digital Development at the Royal Shakespeare Company, and it's a pleasure to see everyone in 3D, which is a remarkable thing. Thanks for coming. Over the next hour and a half, we're going to do some things that we haven't been able to do in person either. We are Maggie, Bain, Sarah Perry, James Turnbull, and Callum from Manchester International Festival. And just to sort of say, we are part of the live performance demonstrator for Audience of the Future, and we had to pivot our demonstrator in a pandemic. And in order to do that, we couldn't meet up. We couldn't see each other in person. And so these moments for us are just as magical because we have made something in a time which has been completely different to how you'd make theatre, completely different to how you'd approach making a piece of work creatively. And so we're going to share with you today some of the technologies that we've worked with, some of the processes we've worked with, and also to get, I think the connection of what Beyond is about industry and research, and bringing those two things together, and how we can share with you some of our process in our language, in how we've explored it, and get to start thinking about the next steps and the future iterations of this. But one of the things we always have to think about in our world is the transference from research and development to production, and those challenges around that, and those real world challenges about technology that we love and we're inspired by, but how we have to keep that contract with our audiences, that technology is robust and that it makes sense, and that we are thinking about our audiences all the time. So I'm going to start with the first slide. And there's three things that I'm going to do as the introduction before you get to the really exciting part, which is Maggie and Sarah showing the technology. Hello, come on in. Basically, Audience of the Future was an opportunity to bring together 14 partners of arts and culture organisations, research partners and technology partners. All of us have worked together in different ways to explore the future of live performance, and all of us have come together around our expertise, and that we haven't done before as organisations. And in that, audiences have been at the heart of this, and the purpose of the demonstrator was to reach wide-ranging audiences, so not just audiences on small scale, but mass-scale audiences, to see how we could test the commercial models, but also test the production models of how we could bring in immersive technology into our theatre-making toolkits and into our practices. In March 2020? Are we in 21? 21. I don't know what year we're in anymore. 1997, when this project started, we pivoted to an online performance. And I just want to give you context. We were due to go into production in Stratford-upon-Avon, and the pandemic hit. And we just had the music from the Philharmonia Orchestra. Our partners have been the RSC, Manchester International Festival, Marshmallow Laser Feast, and the Philharmonia Orchestra. We just had this music, and from that moment, we built up a new performance to an online audience. And in that, we had 10 performances of Dream, which was inspired by William Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream, a performance that you could connect with online using real-time technology, having levels of interactivity. But the first thing that we did in that pivotal moment was we reached out to our research partners, i2 Media, Nesta, to ask where audiences were at. And in that came three compelling highlights for us that absolutely drove the creative team, which were audiences were craving togetherness, they were craving liveness, but there is a huge digital inequity in people's homes. So as we look at the privilege of what we do, and it is a privilege to be part of this, we have to recognise the fact that we still, in the mainstream world, do not have these technologies available to us. They are not in our hands yet. And we have to make work that might compromise the interactivity. It might compromise the artistic vision, but what it does is connect with audiences and make them imagine and make them feel part of a future. And that's super important when we look at research, is how we look at inclusivity from the beginning, and it's not a strategy, but it's an absolute reality for us. So in that moment, what we did was pivoted according to that information, and we created work that was using all the real-time technology that we were committed to at the beginning of the project, but it was distributed fairly through desktop, mobile, and tablet. And by doing that, in 10 performances, we reached 65,000 people. And of those 65,000 people, real-world attenders, they were from 92 countries, a genuinely global feat, because we changed the timing of our performance. It wasn't 7 o'clock on a Friday night every time. We were there at 2 a.m. hard grafting, performing to people in Asia, in America, and finding those new connection points. But also, of those 65,000 audiences, 40% were Generation Y and Generation Z. And to achieve intergenerational work, to look at how we could get research from audiences of our traditional audiences that may not be used to that interactivity, but from an emergent younger audience that do not challenge or think about that interactivity with the same barriers, we're able to look at how we architect our work in the future. And it's in the spirit of that's how we're going to share with you today. But not only that, how performers and practitioners can drive this technology, and it's a powerful thing that they can have in their hands, and how we need to change our performance styles and the way that we perform our work and the way that we build the infrastructures for our work, and engage not with work pre-existing marketed to new audiences, but new work inspired to connect with new audiences. Next slide, please. These are the beautiful technologies that we used. We used all the technology that we tested in R&D, but we refined it according to how that worked in production. We used facial tracking, which you'll see. We used motion capture, which you'll see. And also the thing is, again, our research partners were crucial not only in the audience research, but they were crucial in providing us with the infrastructure to create the work. And the University of Portsmouth, we created an entire volume from scratch in a lockdown. And that's why you see the lines on my face. I'm super tired. But that technology and that resource from a research partner co-creating this experience. And that's what I really want to emphasize today, that collaboration is many people coming around a shared vision, a shared idea, but understanding what their role is, understanding what they offer, and also understanding what they don't have and what they can gain from that. So the real-time technologies we were using were everything that we signed up to, and we created a 7-meter by 7-meter volume for the performers to perform in, but it was a 7-kilometer by 7-kilometer virtual forest that we were absorbed in. And again, I only saw the last performance in person in real life, so it's an absolute privilege to actually spend this time with Maggie and Sarah, and it's a real treat for us today to actually get an insight into this and the real practitioners and the real workers of what this work's about. Final slide, please. We have launched a website today that will be shared, which is the findings of all our learnings. And one thing in the original application that we did is we feel in the arts and culture sector, it's really important to recognise the privilege that we have of a grant like this and share those learnings and findings with our sector. There's nothing proprietorial about knowledge if no one can use it. There's nothing commercial if we're not thinking about our network and our shared audiences. One of the big learnings that we had in things in behind the scenes is that the structures that you have to make this work are really different, and we're converging gaming, broadcast, theatre structures that all have different dependencies, all have different roles and responsibilities. And if there's one thing we're going to share with you, is that's what we learn, and that's really different to the structures of how we make theatre on its own. So it's a really important thing to think about the pipelines to this work. It's really important to think about the need to create the work up front and how long that takes, the types of people that you need to bring in, the expertise, but also the huge amount of testing required in order for you to test it being distributed on multiple platforms. And we weren't just broadcasting out because we were having layers of interactivity. We were getting a feedback from our audiences in real time. And that took huge complexity. And so the infrastructure of using things like Amazon Web Services were really crucial in us having technological capacities to do this on a mass scale. But also we had new people that we were working with that we'd never worked with before. And the challenges around language, the challenges around your expertise are real. And if there's anything we've learned from this is people, the time that you have onboarding people, the time that you have respecting where people are coming from, and the fact that the language, you can say the same sentence and have completely different meanings to people from different industries. So I hope you don't mind me taking the floor and taking up some of Sarah and Maggie's time, but what we wanted to do is just give a little bit of an introduction to what you'll see. It's super special. The technology still has its challenges, and we're going to be really open about that today with you. It's a safe space for us, and the reason why it's safe is because we believe that if we can interrogate this and work with people more broadly, we can find really interesting solutions to this work. And I believe that if you put this technology in the hands of artists, that's where the really awesome stuff's going to happen. And I believe if we can have that dialogue direct with our artists and have that from the beginning, we can architect some really awesome ideas and get really behind what the future forms and the future forms of entertainment that are possible, and also the values of which we want to work in. So thanks very much, welcome. Afterwards we've also got Callum from Manchester that is going to show you some new work that no one's seen before on the Magic Leap devices. So please stay and make sure that you spend time with Callum as well after this demo, and you'll see all the multiple ways that we can use these creative assets going forward. Thank you.
Are we up?
Yeah, you're up.
Yeah, no worries. So we're just calibrating Maggie into the system. So I'll just talk for a little bit while that's happening. My name is Sarah Perry. I work as a movement director, film, TV, theatre, animation, and was the movement director for Dream. We have...
Hi, I'm Maggie, and I'm an actor and movement practitioner, and I played Cobweb in Dream.
Cool. So what we're going to kind of talk through some things today, as Sarah Ellis mentioned, some demonstration of some work that we did on Dream. So you can kind of see, I mean, maybe some of you have seen it already, but see how things were done, see what we were exploring. But we also want to talk to you about things that we're thinking now beyond Dream. So what's interesting for us next? And also what we've been exploring through research and development through the RSC, what we think is working, and also what we think we might need, what we need more time to sort of research and develop a little bit more. So some of it will be Dream, but then hopefully we'll go a little bit beyond that as well. Today, are you all in the...
I'm all good.
You're all in the system. Yes, good. Fingers crossed. And just be open. I know Sarah Ellis said it. You know, it's live, right? So there might be a few things that, that you'll see on these two screens. If things go a little bit wrong or tweaked, we're not going to hide it. We'll just say this is what it is and this is what it should be. And that kind of leads into, I know when Sarah Ellis phoned me up to say, oh, Sarah, you know, would you like to sort of movement direct on this show? I'd done mocap before. But what was really scary and exciting at the same time, I'd never done it live. And this is, I think you'll see some of these things today. It's a whole different ballgame, working with motion capture, needing post-production, and then working with motion capture, it having to be live. So very exciting, but can be very scary at the same time. So what we're going to see now, so do you want to talk a little bit about the suits? Because we had a different suit, didn't we, for Dream, different motion capture suit.
We did. So this is an XENS suit, which means I can go anywhere in this space and it will track me. You might not necessarily be able to see what I'm doing on screen if I go out of that area, but literally I could go for a jog around the harbour and all of that movement would be recorded into this pack. And it could be downloaded and then we could stream that back to you. So we could do a lot of stuff in post-production with this kind of stuff. But this is not what we used for Dream. And the reason for that is that there is a massive amount of drift on this suit. So you probably saw me standing at my calibration point, which is over here. This is the point on the stage where the suit will constantly track my movements to, but that spot will start to drift. And in Dream, because we were dealing with a very specific environment, that drift might mean that, whereas that might be me putting my foot on a tree trunk, if it drifted, that's me putting my foot through a tree trunk and into a stream. And it looks very strange. So we had to use suits that would give us much more control. And so we used, are those suits, do they have any name? Or is it just motion capture?
Well, they're kind of optics, isn't it? And it's working with the cameras. So we had like 47 cameras round and all of these markers on the suits. And again, really picking up nuanced, detailed, subtle movements. So even, I mean, we didn't have the finger tracking, but it would just take very subtle kind of wrist rotation, just, movements. Whereas this one, it doesn't capture such detail, but it gives us a lot of flexibility to be able to tour. We couldn't tour doing this, presentation today with that suit because we'd need a whole studio with all the cameras. We'd need a lot more time to calibrate. As you saw there, it was quite efficient and very quick to calibrate Maggie into the system, which is brilliant for touring and street kind of theatre. The other good thing about this suit is you can put a costume on over.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So with the suit that we were using for Dream, you can't have anything that interferes with the markers, but for this, all of the markers are actually built into the suit, so they're covered. And I can wear anything on top, which is totally fine. So there is the possibility of, being in full costume, which is great.
Yeah, and for actors, I mean, I think that's one of the challenges in Dream. Okay, the characters didn't have costumes, but they were sort of otherworldly characters. They had different bodies, different structures, different skeletal systems. But yet, so for example, Park obviously being stone, for M playing Park, you had to really kind of remember that, because it's easy to slip into just being yourself in this suit, kind of similar to what Maggie's wearing now. But with this, if you were playing a character, for example, I don't know, a period piece, 15th century or something futuristic or an astronaut, if the actor had that costume on, it would have a direct impact on how Maggie would move. Massively, so that would help, wouldn't it? And especially in rehearsal, where we couldn't have that before. Yeah. But it just took more rehearsal time and more, I think experimenting and embodying. Should we see you moving with the avatar?
Yes.
That's all right, James, thank you. So here we have a kind of a stock character, our avatar, and you can see that in real time, whatever Maggie is doing, so maybe have a little play. And it reads really well. We think it does read really well. So keep maybe moving around the space. And you can see, as Maggie was talking before about the drift, that line that you see is linking Maggie as performer to the origin, to where we initially calibrated. So the more Maggie drifts from that origin, the more Maggie is in the suit. If we were doing a lot of physical theatre, it would begin to drift and drift a little bit more. That's okay, but it's not perhaps so good if we wanted to do something as live as Dream and needing it to kind of be spot on with every performance. This would need an element of perhaps post-production or more of a forgiving live performance.
Yeah, or built-in calibration during the performance.
Yeah. Good. Next one, please, James. Cobweb. So Maggie, do you want to talk us through some of kind of what you had to do as a performer to bring Cobweb to life?
So there are three elements to Cobweb that you can control. Quite simply, the eyelids open and close, and they work using my hands. The distance between my hands controls how open or closed that eye is. The iris is controlled by my feet, the distance. So coming forward, hopefully, should make the iris bigger, and back, the iris much smaller. And then the movement of my head controls where the iris is looking. And so it seems pretty simple, but actually it took us a long time to get here. This was weeks. It was weeks into the process before we landed on this. Part of the reason is Cobweb is being built as an asset and changing constantly. But there was conversations at the beginning that it might just be puppeted using my hands. But of course, as an actor, that doesn't give you a lot of emotional scope. It's very difficult to put ferocity or fear into this. So this was a compromise. There was something that was achievable with the art directors and all of that, and what we could do. But again, it's still limiting, but it forces you as the performer to drill into the detail of how much you can put in emotionally into these limited moves. It gives you much more scope than this, but obviously that's a time thing.
Yeah, and I think moving forwards, we may make different decisions on how we would drive this eye, you know, and maybe Maggie, if you don't mind demonstrating some of the cobweb text, and you can see what Maggie had to do physically to drive the performance of the eye.
Never so weary, never so in woe, bedabbled with the dew and torn with briars, I can no further crawl, no further go. My legs can keep no pace with my desires.
Good. And it seems really simple, but to keep that emotion, to keep that kind of depth of feeling and the characterization, it's really hard to sort of embody this. But I think, you know, you did it. You found it. You found that, you know, creating open shapes. This has an element of openness or anger or whatever you wanted to put to it. Closed, you know, bound, feeling frustrated. So we kind of found, by playing with the tech team as well, what simple physical, mechanical movements can we make that also helps Maggie as a performer. And this might not be the best version, but it's where we got to.
Well, what's interesting about this performance here is massively different to what we were doing in the volume because of the fact that whilst performing to you, I can't actually see myself. And with this, that changes everything. And in the room, we had a giant LED bank wall and various screens around the space. And that's a very different mode of performing for me. I'm used to doing a lot of TV work, but just having that one point of focus as the camera is again very, very different to this idea of being read by 47 cameras all around the room. So it took quite a bit of time to kind of get your head around that and being able to look at your performance and adapt to watching it as you're doing it. We don't do that as performers. Your brain is kind of in two different spaces. It's a very interesting place to be, but again, like time is the thing.
And you and Em, as Puck, couldn't look at one another in the eye, but yet had to have this emotional, characterful connection. So it was really building on the peripheral, really, or building on sensing and listening and working on other ways of, you know, obviously like listening, but just being in tune with one another as actors to still try and keep and maintain that connection.
Because you're also, as well as your brain being in two places, you're in two different spaces as well. You're obviously in the space that you are physically in, and you are in this space, and you have to have a sensitivity to both of those at the same time as an emotional connection to this and to what's going on next to you. So it really is sort of a head wrecker in the most wonderful way. But it's an amazing thing to get to play with. Yeah.
And even now as you're moving, if you just move your hands a little bit, you can see that it influences the webs, the eyelashes, the webs as well. So even though, you know, Maggie's moving, doing all this, that was different for Puck every night, because then Puck had to kind of navigate, you know, okay, where's this going to be? Or I have to kind of jump here now, I have to move here now, you know, to try and get out of the way. And it was different. And so that was exciting, but also a bit like, uh-oh, you know, what's Maggie going to do? Maggie and Em can't see each other literally. Well, Em, I think, saw you more, but had an eye more on the LED screen.
Yes.
And then also had another performer. I don't know if some of you may have seen the Q&As. Ed was sort of the puppeteer of Puck in a way, was taking Puck's weight and with that sort of sleight of hand and touch, guiding, because he could see where Maggie was kind of orchestrating the movements of these webs. So it was the three of them really working together, and on the screen you only saw an eye, but there was so much going on in that physical space. and teamwork, I think, with
Massive
all of
amounts
you.
of teamwork, huge. Yeah.
Yeah, and physically listening and just, sensing, I think, one another.
Yeah.
Cool. Anything else you want to say on Cobweb? We're going to see Cobweb, I think, in the
Yeah,
RST,
Yes.
Royal Shakespeare Theatre. This is exciting. I think, taking a character now that you've explored for a while into a different space. And, not only is this exciting for a kind of pre-production tool, and if I was directing or movement directing something, this is, without having to see the actual space, it can really assist and help with some of those sort of planning of rehearsals, planning of production, performance choices, etc. And really useful, I think, for the actor, and correct me if I'm wrong, but now your performance may shift slightly, what you do, how you do it, how far you rotate the head, where your audience is going to have a massive influence on how the performance may go. And I know this is going to be challenging because you can't see yourself, but I'll try and guide you. But imagine that you have you've got audience, you can have a little peek if you want to, but you've got audience to the right, audience to the left, audience in front, so maybe we'll see if the performance changes ever so slightly. Now we've got the context of the theatre.
Never so weary, never so in woe, bedabbled with the dew and torn with briars, I can no further crawl, no further go. My legs can keep no pace with my desires.
Good, thank you. So you can see how we can play with that, right? As a tool, different spaces, lend themselves to different kind of performance styles and choices as well, which is really exciting. And we worked with Matt Peel as well, experimenting when we were just doing some research and development on lighting as well, and having, I don't think we're going to explore it too much today, but just how we can not just use the space as a tool to help us create, but how can we use lighting and manipulate some of that was really interesting to explore.
We've been looking at how to give a certain degree of autonomy to the performers in terms of how the lighting works, that you can change the colour of the lighting depending on the same parameters that you would use to control the eyeball or any of the other parameters actually, and the intensity of it, and it can follow me. It can follow me without the need for a follow spot operator. Yeah.
Lovely. So that's Cobweb.
Yeah.
Let's look at our Metahuman. Maggie had some fun creating Rosemary. It was kind of exciting in itself, putting together these bodies, choosing obviously the body, the face, the eyes, the hair. You can get really detailed with some of these performance choices. And what I find quite interesting with motion capture as a medium for actors is that they can play beyond their scope of normal casting, which I think, obviously more conventional. You have your casting pool, of course you can do more, but Maggie generally is going to have your sort of pool of casting, casting niche, whether it's theatre, TV, film. But now an actor can kind of go beyond that. You can maybe play older, you can play younger, you can play something otherworldly, you can play something hybrid. And I think that just really brings a lot of what we do in our theatre training to use, So we've been exploring some facial capturing. I don't know if you want to talk about kind of what we're using as a tool.
So this is literally just an iPhone, and I can turn it around and maybe you can see this way. It's just capturing my face on a kind of grid. And this is what we used for Mustard Seed in the show. It was played by Lauren. It was a root system underground. So Lauren was off to the side of the volume whilst I think Puck was in the volume.
Puck was in the volume, yeah.
And so, and the amazing thing about this is that I can see everything that I'm doing, but that's also very distracting. Because what we'll find is, if I just stare at myself, and I'm an actor, so I can't help it, the eyes will just look dead on screen, because it's not very realistic for us to have one focal point whilst delivering text. So it's important to sort of keep an eye on it so that I can stay within the range of it and I don't disappear and it stops reading me. But to keep it alive as well, whilst having this barrier between me and you, essentially.
And there's pros and cons with working in this, isn't there? So we are, as you might see, hopefully you can see the detail on the screen. I mean, feel free to kind of stand up, get closer if you wish. But here's another challenge, I think, for an actor. If we want Maggie to say, express, you know, that the script was sort of allowing for, I don't know, more of a naturalistic range of emotion, nothing too overt, you know, maybe just feeling, I don't know, I can't think of an emotion now, but just something that was not heightened and was having something more conversational. Maybe we'll do a speech, if you don't mind, a little bit of text, but not over express in the face, just maybe as if you're talking to me.
Sort of like a TV performance.
Yeah, and then we'll see how that potentially reads on this avatar, if you can see.
Yeah. Oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend the brightest heaven of invention, a kingdom for a stage, princes to act, and monarchs to behold the swelling scene. Then should the warlike Harry, like himself, assume the port of Mars, and at his heels, leashed in like hounds, should famine, sword, and fire crouch for employment.
Good, thank you. So that's quite colloquial, but it's not expressing an awful lot. And I don't know if you can see, and feel free, maybe afterwards we can have a play, and if you have any questions, you know, you can come up to the screen and see it closer. There's not a lot in the eyes. So for someone, I think, that's performing or directing, we want more expression, we want more truth, we want more connection, I think, with the audience. So let's imagine that that was the sort of style we wanted. We didn't want it too heightened, but now to get that expression in the face, that it's readable for an audience, you have to then shift your performance style. So let's go to the other extreme, really over-expressing, and then we'll see how that reads on the avatar as well.
Oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend the brightest heaven of invention, a kingdom for a stage, princes to act, and monarchs to behold the swelling scene. Then should the warlike Harry, like himself, assume the port of Mars, and at his heels, leashed in like hounds, should famine, sword, and fire crouch for employment.
Good. So you can see a different level of expression. And every actor, every character is going to require slightly different kind of performance choices again. So if I was working with Maggie, it'd be different kind of direction that you'd give Lauren or Em. So maybe we might want to find somewhere in the middle.
Medium.
One thing I would say, just watch hands in front of the face,
Okay.
because then we can't see the lovely facial expressions. So somewhere in between. So again, this might not be right, might not be wrong, but this is how we would work, what works for this part. So we might not want it so heightened, we don't want it so kind of mundane and colloquial, somewhere in the middle, and then just watch the hands in front of the face. Yep.
Oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend the brightest heaven of invention, a kingdom for a stage, princes to act, and monarchs to behold the swelling scene. Then should the warlike Harry, like himself, assume the port of Mars, and at his heels, leashed in like hounds, should famine, sword, and fire crouch for employment.
Yeah, I think some nice moments there. So we could play with it until we find, you know, what we wanted. But I know a challenge for an actor, sometimes what you have to do is over-exaggerate the facial expressions, over-exaggerate the mouth movements for them to read quite normal on the avatar. But that's a bit like the cobweb situation. Maggie doesn't want to over-express facial expressions because then loses the truth of the performance, loses what the intention was. So, I mean, maybe talk to us a little bit about that as an experience for you.
About losing intention in...
Yeah, because if you're overworking, because I know Lauren went through that, you had to really overdo the face, but at the same time keep a subtlety of performance.
Yeah, well, and that's it, because it's got to... The most important thing is that it reads for you. But then there's that thing as the performer that you want to give you a truthful experience of what it is. It can't just read. You've got to be able to see it, but it's also got to move you, and I can't move you if I can't connect to the truth of it. And there's such a wide gap. And there are ways, like, I think from Dream, having spent that time working on it, now my brain has been firing since we finished, going, oh, I would try that, and I would try that, and this is what I would do. And I obsess over this, I think, more than I have any other thing, because there are so many possibilities and so many things I want to try. And it's just about having the time to do that, and of course the resource to be able to have time to play with it. But yeah, it is a tricky divide. And you don't have any of that real-time feedback as well. If I take my eye off the screen, I don't have any feedback from the audience. This is very, very strange to how I would do anything, really. You know, you'd always have a way of having some kind of feedback, whether it's from, you know, looking directly at another actor in a scene, even if they're not on camera with you, there is always a way of getting some kind of feedback for what it is that you're doing. In this, it's very, very different.
Yeah, and I think moving forwards, one of the challenges I'd like to kind of work with is, even though we had Cobweb as an eye and we had the facial capturing for Mustard Seed, Peas Blossom and Puck didn't have faces. And in a way, thank goodness, because they had to look at the screen. We had the big LED screen, I think we mentioned, at the back, to make sure that they were hitting marks, to make sure that they were in the right place, not treading through the log, but on the log, not in the puddle, but over the puddle, for example. But what next for me is exciting. What if we had the faces as well? And how do we overcome that in a live setting? I think would be really challenging, but I'll be up, you know, I'm sure us as a team will be up for that challenge, because then you can't just have a peek at the screen and am I in the right place? Because that's what you're going to read as a viewer. So I think that's the next step that I think we would like to explore further. And we like this, but we don't think it's there completely in terms of the readability of the truth with some of these faces, but it's, you know, we're kind of getting there. I guess it's also
about where you spend that time as well. Do we spend the time figuring out the language for this whilst this is also getting better? So if we have more access to the developments of what's happening with this technology, it means time isn't being wasted trying to make something work for something that's going to be obsolete in It was like Alex, who was our head of mocap, when he put me in this suit in Portsmouth a few weeks ago, he'd not taken it out of the box for about 6 months, which doesn't sound like a lot of time, but by the time he'd taken it out of the box and plugged it into the computer, the updates were unbelievable.
We spent a whole day just doing that.
Exactly. And he basically had to relearn how to operate the suit. And of course did it amazingly and a lot quicker than you know, certainly I could have done, but it's about, you know, I guess where you spend that time. What's worth it?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of, you know, kind of projects, they just want, you know, sometimes you only get 2 days as a movement director, performer. Okay, we're going to shoot some mocap. We're going to have 2 days to do it. Yeah, you know, 1, you need time to rehearse and get into character. 2, you need 2 days sometimes just to get, to get the tech to calibrate with you, and vice versa. So yeah.
Have you explored haptic suits?
No, I don't think so. Haptic suits.
So full body haptics, when you get feedback, physical feedback into your body as you're doing stuff, so that may be able to incorporate that where you are in the stage in relation to feedback you're getting.
So is that feedback from a screen or feedback from how?
From where you are within the world, so
right.
Coming into contact with something, you'll get some feeling into your body.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Yeah, no, we'll talk about that. I think that sounds, interesting. Cool. Let's move on. Thank you, James. So thank you, Maggie. So now we will see Rosemary back in the theatre, and then maybe just for fun, how that performance would change, how that dialogue may change, now considering the context of audience. I'm now in a bigger space. I now have to project, not vocally, but physically. and what choices does Maggie make for that. So at the moment, yep, you're pretty much
Centre stage.
Ish, yeah.
Ish.
We'll get away with that.
Which is, again, and then this is again one of the things of performance. I'm in the room performing this to you, but I've got to base it for a screen. And so centre stage, this is where I want to be. All of my training tells me this is the best place for me to talk to you. But in order to deliver that, I have to be in this weird position here with, you know, so many obstacles. So it's.
But if we were doing a production, though, we would, you know, that the stage, and we were touring it, the stage would be the same all the time, the dimensions, the specifications, so it wouldn't matter. But because we're coming into different spaces all the time, it's interesting, an interesting challenge, which we're working out this morning. Like, where is Maggie? Maggie's over there. Yeah, so go for it. I'll step out of the way.
Okay. Oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend the brightest heaven of invention. A kingdom for a stage, princes to act, and monarchs to behold the swelling scene. Then should the warlike Harry, like himself, assume the port of Mars, and at his heels, leashed in like hounds, should famine, sword, and fire crouch for employment.
Nice. Thank you. Really nice. And this is also good, you know, say if we weren't able to get to that physical space, let's pretend we were going on tour to Australia. We can't just go there to the theatre to rehearse, but we could get something like this. So as creatives, it's really useful then to choreograph some of these elements. Where do I need to go? And it might shift, of course, once you get into the actual space. But where can Maggie go? How can you get close up to the audience? Where can you approach them? Where can you kind of, I don't know, go or not go, or just explore before you're actually there, I think is a really interesting tool to have as creatives. Thank you, James. Next one. Peas blossom. Oh, yes. So this is just kind of an example of how we could, again, if we were working on this production and we were blending physical performance with a virtual performance, and we wanted to bring that environment into the space. This is very what we had with Dream. Peas Blossom we can't see him too clearly here, so forgive us for that, but I think we might be able to just show how you can interact. I know you can't see Maggie, but there are trees around you, there are bushes that you can kind of go into, and there's not a direct impact, so Maggie's not actually touching them, but there as a performer, you're believing that they're there, you're working with them. And we spent a lot of time on Dream. Obviously, we didn't have the trees there in the physical space. We didn't have all of those things, but we had to know where they were. We had to kind of choreograph as if they were there, and the actors sort of, you know, touching things or being near things or brushing past things or hearing things. And again, this is a nice tool to really play with for the actor to get used to that. Yeah. So we would spend a lot of time in rehearsal exploring the world that we're going to be in. Thank you, James. And this part is really exciting for me. So this is where we didn't have this in Dream, but this is where we're kind of looking at what's next, is how you can play with physics. So in Dream we had, oh yeah, there's a tree, let's just pretend I'm touching it. But now, as Maggie maybe runs around the space a little bit,
so I don't know if this
Maggie
is
can't
see. Work that well,
if we had a big screen.
Forgive me if I'm being...
That's all right, go for it. So just, so you can see that Maggie is actually influencing, kicking. The physics of their body is really having that direct impact on these tools, and I find this really exciting. You know, you could have audience members kind of throwing things in. You could have that interactiveness. You can now start to influence. It's not just something's there, but you're influencing these things that are there. So these are just balls and squares, but you know, you could go quite far with this if it was a forest scene, or if it was, I don't know, it could be anything. Yeah. Really exciting. Just do another little run, go through. Maybe jump down there. Would it work if you jump down there? Come up here. This is where I come into useful. Maybe you can come. This is where we'd have to work together.
This is why you need actors.
There you go. There you are. Kick the TV. And it was, you know, on Dream in a way, we didn't have this actually working with the physics of moving things, but this is how we had to explore. And every day it shifted, it changed. And sometimes we could be in rehearsal and like, okay, Maggie, we're over here. This is our playing space. So we'd put the log there, we'd put the tree there, or whatever it may be. And then the next day, because assets were continually being added and changed, it would be somewhere else, wouldn't it? So for M in particular, playing Park, it was like, you know, a lot to kind of deal with.
Such a head wrecker.
Yeah. But that's why we needed time. We needed time in that rehearsal space to play. It's all about playing. And then once you've kind of got that world, got the physics, got a bit of spatial awareness, then we could... Right, okay. Write that down, Sarah.
Yes, we did use a headset. We don't have one with us today. And actually, when we were doing Dream, Lauren was static.
Yep.
When she was delivering hers. And it does certainly help, but it also does create a massive distance. And especially if two of you are wearing it and you're having a very intimate scene, you are miles away from each other.
And it was I think it didn't always come across, but it was heavily physical in the real space. Yeah. So actors were on the floor, crawling, jumping, people were being lifted, people were taking weight, people were sort of being lifted and dropped. So if we had that apparatus, it wouldn't have worked. And it would have been another thing that would have perhaps got in the way of the tracking. So...
was just released last week, which is a much smaller nature form factor.
Right.
Oh, interesting.
Write that down.
Okay, yes.
Probably mixed reality would have probably
Yeah.
track the headset.
Yeah.
Yeah. So much to explore, isn't there? So much. It's so exciting. Yeah. So then finally, what we find quite exciting is that we can take these characters into different spaces. That the audience, you know, if you're at the RST, you couldn't go up to the fly tower, but now we can take you there and we can change the proportions of the characters. And how does that have an influence on Maggie's performance? So I know you can't see Maggie, you're doing very well. Have a little jump over the, there you go, good, yeah. So if we wanted to be really accurate, we would choreograph, you know, we would spend time sort of blocking and making some choices and marking perhaps the floor and things like that. But it just gives us another space to play in. And every space that's different, every proportion of the character that's different, there needs to be another kind of, it's not just about performance choice, but another way of moving, different movement language. We work a lot with Laban, where science meets art as a vocabulary for us as creatives, and that works quite well with animators as well, to share that language, and that's something that we're, you know, working on building too. But yeah, I think that's kind of back down to the theatre. Where Rosemary will find centre stage again, maybe not.
Who knows? Where do I need to be?
Well, this is about, just there,
here?
and you can take your bow. Now you're facing the audience,
Am I? Okay.
Ta-da!